Okay, so today we have with us Dr. Spiro Lazarou, who's a surgeon, specialist in cleft palate surgery, trained among other places at the University of Johns Hopkins. He worked as a surgeon in Albania for a period alongside Archbishop Anastasios of blessed memory, is now working and living in Greece. He also has many other distinctions, which you can find. I believe you have a website, Dr. Spiros Lazarou. And we also have with us Dr. Timothy Patitsas, whom many of you will know. The former dean of Hellenic College, author of Ethics of Beauty, founder of Beauty First Films, creator of magnificent liturgical calendars. Also, the pilgrimage passport thing
Yeah,
is a thing now, huh?
it is.
I don't
It is.
have one yet, but I need to buy one. So those exist as well. And today we're going to kind of follow up on a conversation. Blessed all three of us to be able to have a short conversation in Greece this past summer. And Dr. Spiro, you said something that I had never heard before, at least I don't think I'd heard it before, which is that theology is politics and politics is theology. So I basically hope that you guys can talk about that.
What exactly do you want to talk about regarding?
Anything. Well, okay, so you mentioned, right, Christ answers the political question, how should we live together? And of course there is a
Mm.
sort of there is I mean it's structurally even the eschaton is political in a certain sense. Like there's the New
Well,
Jerusalem.
everything has an eschaton. Every human ideology, every including the predominant one today of capitalism, is definitely eschatological. Think about what money is. Money is a promise. Eye is not seen, hand is not touched, ear is not heard. The value of a dollar. It's a promise taken from the future. And it's a promise to pay. It's a promise of exchange value. So there's no question that all the isms of that we produce have an eschatological dimension. But I guess to really maybe develop this idea of theology as politics, or it's a tautology in my view. I say it that way, as others, friends, discussions that I've made from friends with whom I've had discussions on the matter, it really is something to emphasize the fact that our theology has lost its political dimension. Uh, and I guess before maybe delving into this, maybe we need to define some terms like what theology is. So for me, theology is not uh, what you would typically think of as sort of the interpersonal conversations we might have on the Trinity or the two natures of Christ or any of a zillion other things. Okay, that's about theology in a way. It's sort of like many Christians who think the Bible is revelation. No, the Bible is not revelation. Moses is having the revelation. I'm reading about it. So theology is, in my view, it's an audio, a limit between the world and the eschaton. And when the world submits perfectly in the body of Christ to the eschaton, the eschaton and the world are not places, they're tropi, they're ways. Then you have onomatodosia, you have words, you have logi, you have words and logos that redeem and regenerate creation. It's 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 not repeating creation, not evolving creation, but regenerating it continuously. So by definition, that's political. And the uniqueness of this theology is it's in its apophatic character. In its apophatic character alone, it is deeply political because apophatically, it's a gesture to dialogue. It means there are no final interpretations given proclamations of this life in the eschaton. It's open. Therefore, it allows infinite space for human liberty.
Yeah, allows individual space for human liberty.
Right. So, yeah, apophatic theology, the apophatic nature uh, of our theology is its uniqueness and what allows for liberty. And that theology produces a true knowledge that is the fruit of concrete experience, as opposed to all human utopian thinking, which is abstract and reductive and comes from here, from our fantasy, which by definition is cataphatic and therefore the source of all violence. Therefore, all political structures of power are man's attempt for his autonomized conscience and fantasy to evaluate the world, to sit in judgment of good and evil. It is the knowledge, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, an autonomized fantasy. So, as a surgeon, I'm very concrete. Truth for me is a patient in front of me. And when that blade hits the skin, there's no theorizing for me. There's no fantasy. And I guess that's one of the things I want to say is a lot of what I express or believe isn't the fruit of speculative thinking. I try and put into my logical essence through the gift of word that the word gave me, which is the flesh, the womb of my conscience to help interpret and understand the world. A lot of it comes through my concrete experience. I have no degree or particular study in philosophy or theology or any of these things. So a lot of the terms I don't even often quite grasp. So that's what, in a nutshell, theology and politiki, not politics in the sense of Democrats and Republicans and all that. That all is nonsense for me. This is just mafia groups vying for power. Real politics, as you mentioned earlier, and just from another dimension or perspective, ask a simple question: how should we live together? And when we answer that question, we set limits, nomos, nomi, on that of our house, eco, come up with an economy. And first we will do that, there has to be a call to exercis, a call to the commons, to the agora, which doesn't mean market. Agora is from agorevo, that way we gather to speak, and for each to set his opinion on how we shall live together. Anyway, I guess sort of that as an intro to the relationship of what I mean by political theology. I'll say maybe another aspect too. You can think of political theology as a political energy. Since Descartes, power is understood to have two facets: natural or physical power, which is harvesting the machine with an energy. And then there's human power, which is evident in speech and action. But there's a third power which modern enlightened society rejects, and that's the political energy behind human action and word. Now, because in, I guess, the mind of those people the political energy of the church, whatever experience they had of it, led to all manner of structures of power and violence. They subsumed that political energy in the now new Cartesian autonomous man, the assumption that that violence would disappear. But in fact, by subsuming that violence, that political energy to the human, it's made violence and the potential of it infinite and totalitarian. Because that rests not on any potential divine limits at all, but on human fantasy, where there is no limits. And it's not accidental that this coincides with the monetary system that develops in parallel historically with these developments, a monetary system that has no limits, because interest has no limits, which is why Aristotle forbade, he didn't forbid anything, but wrote vehemently against interest-bearing money. It's why the Spartans absolutely rejected money. No Spartan citizen was allowed to have coin. It's why the church did not allow interest-bearing money. It's why St. Basil the Great, in one of his 3 talks on interest-bearing money, says, the Lord has set limits in time and space on all things. A lion will live this many years, grow this big, etc. There's only one thing that has no limits in time and space, and that's interest-bearing money. Therefore, it's diabolical. So we have a society today whose whole breath, whose Tao, whose Holy Spirit is money. Everything about our society is money. And interest-bearing money imposes besides being an eschatology, it imposes an obligation now. I have to pay off the debt, because money comes into circulation as a debt. I personally may not have a debt, but the money I have, somebody owes. So it doesn't belong to me. That's why the small print from the bank says it's a conditional liability. Once you deposit at the bank, it's theirs. And that's why with more recent laws, even your brokerage firm has the right to liquidate all that you have, should such a crisis necessitate it, because it doesn't, in the end, belong to you. So you can see this whole society we've built up is a society based on the illusion of freedom, the illusion of wealth, illusions, because it all rests on human imagination and fantasy. So I have a quote here from Philip Goodchild. I really like it. He says, when God promises eternity, money promises the world. Where God offers a delayed reward, money offers a reward in advance. Where God offers himself as grace, money offers itself as a loan. Where God offers spiritual benefits, money offers tangible benefits. Where God accepts all repentant sinners who truly believe, money may be accepted by all who are willing to trust in its value. Where God requires conversion of the soul, money empowers the existing desires and plans of the soul. And that's really, money mediates desire. Money is deeply theological in the sense that it's a conversation, it's a topic that the scriptures discuss more, this is an academic sense, than love itself. You can see in the Old Testament, I divide it into 2 main periods. There's the period from Moses on of the increase of the glory of God among his people. And then when his people demand to accept the state and monetary structures of society around them, from that time on, it's a decay of the glory of God. From Isaiah on, every prophet condemns the greed, the lust, the idolatry, the wretchedness, and the apostasy of the people of God.
In the Shlomo Sands, The Invention of the Land of Israel, he describes how among sort of the rabbinic elite of Eastern Europe in the late 19th century, the feeling was not that um, if we could have a state of our own, it would hasten the return of the Messiah, but rather they drew the opposite conclusion that should we have a state of our own, it would delay the return of the Messiah, and that because it would be trying to create some kind of this worldly state, as you seem to put that in context. Whereas I've also read, this is decades ago now, so I don't remember the source, that when Christopher Columbus set sail for the New World, he invoked Saint Joachim of Fiore, who preached that history was divided into the age of the Father, the age of the Son, and the age of the Spirit, and that discovering the entire world would compel Christ to return, would compel the second coming. So, interesting ideas. But could you say something about one thing in particular? You said that we live under an illusory sense of freedom. What is real freedom? What does real freedom look like? Or is it possible for a person to attain that within the midst of this system or that we currently live in, or any system?
Well, in this life, we won't experience absolute freedom till the next life. We're in the bosoms of the Lord and freed from all the effects of the bondage of death, the devil, and sin. But in this life, a rudimentary freedom can be had, I think, when society lives autonomously. And that's crucial for us to define that, because I just spoke of an autonomous imagination, right? But now I mean it in a very different sense. We have to use the same words for certain things, but we have to define our context. That is free of the violence of the heteronomic, bureaucratic, bourgeois state, and worse, the endless violence and anomie because it is without limits monetary system we currently live with. So I'm connecting it again to Aristotle and Basil and to what those before us have, by observation, have already said. So where freedom exists, where two people can commune naturally with each other. Now, by naturally, I mean with the restored natures that the energies of God necessitate, that allow two hearts to move freely to each other, unencumbered by fake values. So money corrupts everything. One of the struggles I had as a physician in Greece, and one of the reasons I really liked and wanted to come here to practice medicine, is that pretty much everything here is cash. Very few people have insurance. Now, in America, the patient-doctor relationship is very smiley-wily because you're not going to talk money. You're going to go and give your insurance information to the secretary, and that's the end of it. But in Greece, that's not the case. In Greece, once I've seen the patient, we've discussed a variety of things, then we get to where the rubber meets the road, and that is, what's this going to cost, doc? So that cost, that discussion really came as a veil, as something between, as I meditated on it. That system of evaluation that's very totalitarian, that intercedes, that mediates the relationship, is corrupting of the relationship of two logical beings, logical, who just shared their hearts, and I gave them whatever I could give them in terms of knowledge my training gave me. They give me their trust. They're offering me their child, because that's mainly what I operate on. And suddenly now there's this discussion of evaluating this in monetary terms. What's all this worth? You see? So I kind of came up with a formula, which, because most people that are part of this system and they really do evaluate value, they're disconnected from the church, from any remotely Christian way of actually seeing anything. They equate value with a price. So in this case, I had a very high price for the value of what I offered them. Now, how was I at the same time going to undermine or set a different kind of tone? Well, I would conclude by saying, you give me what you can. I don't do any wallet checks or bank account checks. You can lie to me. I don't hold any records of who's paid me what. Doesn't matter to me. I mean, I have to cut receipts. I could go back on those and see, I guess. It doesn't matter. The Lord enabled me to cover my bills at the end of the month, and most of the time I have something left over. I have people come back to me 1, 2, and 3 years later saying, Doc, here's a little more money. Okay, if you didn't say it, I don't know. I didn't keep any record of it. So that's kind of the formula for reconstructive surgery, which is the vast majority of what I do, that I used to deal with the whole money thing. Now, for the aesthetic stuff, I didn't do that. Like for someone who came to me for a facelift or, for wrinkles, whatever, I didn't do that. I said, this is a different kind of problem. There's a different sort of narcissism and vanity involved in this, the nature of which did not allow me in good conscience to do the same thing. So there was a fixed high price. And if they told me, occasionally they'd tell me, oh, can I pay you in installments? I'd say, I'm not a bank. I don't do the installment thing. I said, it's nothing urgent here. When you get your money together, you can come back. So that's kind of, I lost my train of thought a little bit. I don't know where we started, but
Well, can I connect it? So it's nice to be in relations or in situations where I can say that here's the price, pay me what you can. And that may be, let's say I have a job, but I also have a garden and I'm selling vegetables on the side. And with that, at least I can do that. I assume within family relations, like if my cousin asked me to repair his car and I'm an auto mechanic, in that case, I might say, normally this costs X, just pay me what you can. So in other words, I'm increasing the space of freedom. You seem to be saying, to the degree to which I can set things up to be able to have the freedom to do that.
listen, in my office, every room is filled with some unmercenary saint, right? So it's the ideal that I aspire to, but have not achieved. The ideal is to be free from all of this. Now, having said that, yeah, that's it. Having said that, the scriptures don't give us a prescription for how to conduct ourselves. Again, the apophatic nature of the gospel doesn't allow that kind of thing. That would be an impingement on my liberty to work my salvation out. So, to go back to money, we would have to, a rudimentary freedom would require another form, if I were to put in economic terms, another form of credit, right? With different valuations other than profit itself and the necessity to pay back interest. So we'll put that on the shelf for those who want to think of other monetary systems. But the scriptures don't give us prescriptions. Paul, however, does give us in 1 Corinthians 7 sort of some guidance when he tells us to mourn as if not mourning, marry as if not married, buy as if not owning, use the things of this world as if not sovereign. And there are one of many keys that the scriptures give us on how to relate to the world around us. And the as if not is essentially to distance ourselves from every ethical, psychological, whatever attachment we have to things in this life, to live a sort of super conscious, nihilistic relationship to everything, which frees us from daily necessity and the vicious cycle of corruption that all of that traps us in. Again, has to do with desire. Frees us from our desire. Let me step back. All Roman society, especially, I won't say all necessarily, but to my knowledge, all, but let's focus on Roman society, which is what we're the descendants of. Roman society is built on a certain polarity. That is individual desire, common law. In other words, Spiros is the sum total of his desires. Some natural, some unnatural. Some come from inside of me, some from outside of me. My desire for food, drink, sex, those are kind of natural desires. Unnatural, my desire for a Ferrari, that comes from outside of me, right? That's not. But anyway, I'm the sum total of my desires. For a million Spiros to be able to cooperate in some with a modicum of peace, an impersonal common law has to set a limit to an arbitrary limit to our desires, to all of these Spiros' desires. Okay? It's cataphatic. It's a form of violence. It's an impingement on me. Jesus, without getting into very specific discussions about different political forms or economic forms, nevertheless, definitely with his life, rejected Roman possessiveness, let's say, and monetary reality theory by reversing the polarity. Common experience of love in the Eucharist becomes the personal law of 10,000 individual Spiros. Who go out then working out the struggle of love, overcoming the daily cycle of decay and death that possessiveness keeps us in. So what you have there is the personalization of law, of ethics. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And the politicization of experience, personal experience. You owe no one anything but a debt of love. So we have pulling the rug out, overturning the whole edifice of the kingdom of Caesar. Okay? Which traps us in the vicious cycle of decay. and really think about it. Interest-bearing money and the whole bourgeois system of life of atomized individual economic units. The eschatological implications is hell with no end. That's what interest means. No end. I don't know what the next life exactly is going to be like. But the Lord calls us to the virtuous, endless cycle of self-offering, which is concrete. It's a sharing of two hearts with no intermediation of anything that corrupts that relationship. It implies a restored nature. It implies participating in the uncreated energies of God that restore that nature. And it has nothing to do with an autonomized fantasy. Now, what I said earlier is to be, and that's what creates, okay, it's in the energies of God that then I am truly autonomous. Because remember, everything in the kingdom of Satan is an inversion or a copy, a fake copy, a light, a created light versus an uncreated light. You see? So I am only truly autonomous in Christ, where because Christ fulfilled the law. And it's only in fulfilling the law that nature is restored, because the law reflects his love. But remember, the law that God gives to man doesn't come with penalties. It's structures of power that then use the law as a hammer against human conscience and create penalties. Jesus didn't tell anybody to do 5,000 prostrations. He said, go and sin no more, so some worse doesn't befall you. So am I saying there's no place for the prostration? No, not at all. Don't take it that way. But it wasn't used as a hammer against my conscience. That is, the Father doesn't use it. Christ doesn't use it as his law as a hammer against my conscience. That creates religious institutions. When the emperor became a Christian in Byzantium, and especially when Theodosius made Christianity the official religion of the state, this is the wellspring of the whole monastic movement, who saw millions of Christians who saw the threat of an institutionalized church. And it's danced now with the state and state structures of power. The fathers tried to economize that and carefully prevented the state from using the church to manage its human relations within the state. Because that's not what the church is about. And it's that produced theology, the experience of the Father, the Basil, the Gregory, in his perfect submission of his will to Christ is what produced the words, the onomata, that gave us that great theology, the great dogmas, the great liturgical text that began transforming the world. What the Byzantine state wasn't able to accomplish, the Ottomans did by identifying, or by taking the mitre of the emperor and putting it on the head of the bishop and said, you are now the head of these people, and giving them worldly power. And that was completely finished. So our ability to produce theology pretty much ended then with the establishment of the modern little states here, Greece and Albania and Bulgaria and Romania, where the church is like a sub-department of the Department of Philosophy and whatever, some sort of ethical sort of structure. So here, the irony today is that what the church healed, what Christ healed, in the cosmic implications of his incarnation, which is the unification of the human person from Platonic, Neoplatonic, Manichaean divisions of body and soul, the church now embraces within herself in her relationship with the state, body, state, soul, church. So even though she has in her the Eucharist, dogmas of the councils, and this rich liturgical wealth, she simultaneously undermines herself and makes herself today almost irrelevant because she's unable to produce serious theology. She either ignores what's going on in the world or simply embraces it and becomes, takes on the fads of political correctness. Because she embraces the very division Jesus healed between body and soul in the human person.
Before you go further with that, the original polarity you said was individual desire and common law.
Yeah.
And then you said that the church and Christ and the church invert that.
Mm.
Is it that, are you, in other words, thinking of the Eucharist as an experience of common desire because it's an agape meal, which then becomes the personal law?
Exactly.
So the liturgy is not
It's not only common desire, it's the common experience of the uncreated glory of God and the love that's poured out there. That's the we develop a common sense, a common logic that then we take in our struggle of love and make it our personal law.
so it becomes a source of personal law because it's beyond law. That's how it can be a source, and it becomes and it's like your story about the surgery. Here's the price, pay what you can. It's so the liturgy is a realm of pure gift, and that's
Pure,
why it's the source of
again,
these other
right.
things.
So it's very important to understand. See, in our mind, in our psyche, we try and justify what we can't achieve. That's problematic. It means we create hypocrisy, we create illusions. It's narcissistic. No. When you read the prayers every day, we read in the morning, they're extreme in their language. Okay. I can't understand that if I understand sin moralistically, and not as a condition of decay. So I have no pretensions. How should I put it? When the Lord comes down to us, we keep sinking. So when he gives us the Decalogue, he says, "Thou shalt not steal." He's not condoning property by telling you, "Thou shalt not steal." He's coming where you are. You've divided up his gift of this planet into mine and yours. He says, "Okay, at least don't take each other's." Okay. But further along, when we decide we want to join the monetary and state system, the world around us, there's this conversation with Samuel that's saying, "This is ridiculous." The conversation is quite amusing. Samuel tells the people, well, why do you want a king? So he can take your kids and fight wars, and so he can tax you and take your sweat of your work. And they said, "Yeah, we want that." And then he goes back to the Lord, and the Lord says, "Did you tell him?" And he says to the Lord, "They want the state. They want to be inducted into the monetary system of the world around." And the Lord says, "What? Did you tell them? What do they want to do with a king who's going to take their kids to fight his ridiculous wars and then tax their..." He says, "Yeah, I told them, and they still want it. Okay, bless it." Decay, right? It's a decay, but the Lord comes down, blesses it. Blessing it doesn't condone. You see what I'm saying?
Does it staunch the decay temporarily until the return of Christ somehow, or does it just make it more visible because they
Yeah, I think
get
it
this
makes
king in this
makes it make
state
it
and they're
more.
not happy there either?
I mean, when you look at Ezekiel and Isaiah and the prophets afterwards and their constant condemnation of what's going on, it's just revealing our wretchedness and our further movement away from the law of God, which is love, which is summarized as love for God and love for neighbor.
Well,
So
I
the
like
fact that the Lord may bless, some money doesn't mean in any ways condoning money.
a monk in Rhodos once, a Serbian guy, said to me, I asked him, what is the economic theory of the monastery? And he said, well, it's very simple. We give people things, and sometimes they give us things. It seemed to be working.
Yeah. Well, again, the monastery is crucial for us when they function properly, because the whole purpose of that, of moving into the village or married people, eventually the monastery's organization, the essence of the monastery isn't its celibacy, it's its common life. We forget that sometimes. Okay. And we forget too that the ecumenical councils were not a bunch of bishops simply getting together. It was the bishops transferring the faith of the people up along. So your parishes, their congregation with their priest expressing the common experience of the faith, and those priests would get together with their bishop, bringing up to the bishop's attention, so to speak, the common experience of their people, the faith, and then those bishops getting together with the metropolitans, and then they went. The way these councils are presented today is if it's a bunch of experts disconnected from the hoi polloi below. They were bringing the faith and experience of the people. They were maybe better able to articulate certain things, but they were bringing the faith of the people into those councils. In other words,
Yeah.
contrary to today's pretty rampant clericalism, there was a tremendous, let's say, spirit of democracy. Now, I want to be very careful with that word. I said in our discussion when you were in Greece, I did mention, I think, that it's counterintuitive, but the West, in the same way it needs to become autonomous, as I mentioned earlier, it has to become its journey politically must be toward democracy. And what do I mean by that? The West, I think one of the biggest pieces of propaganda or psyops that have been going on for the past century in the West is that the West has democratic liberal governments. The West wouldn't know democracy if it hit it in its head. It has no experience of democracy, zero. It's a complete misuse of the word. Democracy is not defined by voting. Democracy simply means power rests with people. Nobody in his right mind thinks today that people have any political power. According to Greek political thought, what the West has is elected monarchies. The West went from a feudal system of divine monarchies that were passed down racially by blood. The children of the kings, etc., became kings. And it moved to the show, the theater of elected monarchies, where I pick a monarch, where this theater is set up, where certain people are offered to me as choices. I pick this monarch, and then he does what he wants for the next 4 or 5 years. He picks his assistants, his co-workers, and a host of other people. I have no say in the matter, who he picks. I cannot recall him after a year and say, hey, you haven't done your job. You're out of here. Go home. I need a Bill of Rights. Why do I need a Bill of Rights? Democracies don't have Bill of Rights. I need a Bill of Rights because I know that power doesn't rest with me. It rests over there, and to protect me from its encroachment. So the West has never had serious democracy because, first of all, democracy presupposes a demos, an us. You can't have democracy with a bunch of I's. The demos, the power of the demos, the people, is not just people at large, not individuals. It's those who form a community. There's an us there. So as an us, they have, by definition, higher goals than my individual desires. There are common goals, common experience that comes from their common experience of life. Now, democracy is not a system. It can have countless forms. Sparta was a democracy. Athens was a democracy. Sparta had 2 kings. When Lycurgus received the great Erythra from the oracle at Delphi to establish the Spartan kingdom, the oracle said plainly, that the voice of the and power of the people must be heard, that whatever you set up has got to be grounded on the voice and power of the people. So they set up, and by the way, there were no texts, no written documents. None of this is written. And that shows part of the already existing apophatic mentality of the Greek mind. There were no clearly prescribed structures of power. This is the legislature. This is the executive. This is which produces all kinds of friction and corruption. It produces, for the Westerner, a chaotic situation you can't comprehend in Greek life and culture, but not for the Greek. So you had the Gerondes, there had to be over 60, 30 of them that were elected by the people, who had to be over 18 to vote, and who also elected 5 ephori. You could only be an ephoros once in your life. They had to be over 30 and for a year. And so there was, with unwritten system of checks and balances between the group. As I said earlier, the Spartans were not allowed to have coins. Those were a no-no. And because Spartans were busy with playing war games, I don't want to idealize them, by the way, their wives had a say in the public square because they ran the business of the house. They couldn't vote, but unlike other Athenians, other Greek cities, they had to be heard. The house had to be managed, and the issues of the home had to be addressed in the public square. The Athenians developed something similar, a little bit. They didn't have kings. They had the general. Pericles was a general, right? That was the highest office. And then they had their vuli and some other mechanisms. Again, the Athenians wrote about things, but not to exhaust them. Not to exhaust them. There was no clearly defined system of structures of power like the legislate, like we do in the West.
I mean, anything that, we try to say about, how to capture freedom in a system is going to run into this problem that you're talking about. The partly this problem of the mind, that it's not the nous, it's some other kind of intellect. And you said many minutes ago, you said about as a surgeon that from the time the knife hits the skin, you said something about theory goes out the window, but it wasn't theory sort of the propedeutic, isn't theory the necessary preparation for you to get to that point, or is there a certain symbiosis of theory and practice?
Yeah, I didn't mean theory. I didn't mean theory. I meant fantasy. Okay.
That's right. What's the distinction between, the ideologies that we've got since Descartes, I mean,
See,
and
I can't.
a healthy theory, let's say.
On the contrary, when you're operating, you have to operate with principles, proven theories, let's say, of how of anatomy and physiology and what the effects of my actions will be. The moment I put that knife, I can't imagine anything. I can't start fantasizing some other kind of result than what that knife has produced. That's kind of, I don't know if you can follow that, but what I mean. The
If I could, yeah, so one thing I was kind of thinking about that's in connection with this is it depends, I guess, how you understand apophaticism, because I kind of was thinking like we have to have epistemological security somehow for doing anything. So even politically, maybe if you could expound on how you can act apophatically, because I understand that making actions based off cataphatic grounds, because cataphaticism is always dialectical, because images and words are always dialectical. That's violent. But there's an intelligibility even within apophaticism that you do need. Like you need the principles for doing surgery. You can't you can't just
Yeah,
feel
let's
your
say that
way.
Now once you're talking now about the material world, there were in different sort of categories. Now, apophatic in this case, the difference between, say, cooperating with nature versus my trying to impose my will over nature, the difference between regenerative farming and monoculture farming. The monoculture farmer, product of the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, etc., rejects or ignores the fact that nature works as a polyculture with countless plants, bacteria, fungi, bugs, and animals in a certain ecosystem. There's an ecosystem. The monoculture farmer says, no, I want here 1,000,000 acres of corn or 1,000 olive trees. So every day he wakes up thinking what he's going to poison next. In the end, in the short run, it may have made food growing more efficient, but it's made less. And now we know it's harming us. Okay, medicine operates with the same reductive. Remember I mentioned earlier, once you disconnect, banish God from natural relationships and the world, because although our theology is apophatic, at the same time, it is the only true reality upon which all other reality exists. So the medicine is affected by the same reductionist mentality. I reduce or disintegrate the ecosystem of the body to organs, into sub-organs, into sub-functions. All of that is to give me the illusion of knowledge, mastery, and control. And there's a hell of a lot of propaganda and pretense to maintain the illusion that I'm actually providing health when the only thing I'm doing is managing symptoms and making a heck of a lot of money from it. So I remember one time a patient, 39-year-old young lady came to me. She was in tears. She came with her mother, left her 2 kids somewhere at home. She got brought into the room. She was in tears. I said, what's the matter? She said, Doc, this morning I woke up and Lazarou, they say, I woke up this morning and I saw a line right here. I said, what do you mean you saw a line? I said, yeah. She said, I could see a wrinkle. I don't know what to do. I'm distraught. So I'm looking at this thing. I don't see anything. So I pretended like I was pulling out from my pocket a magnifying glass and I kind of started doing this, where the wrinkle was. Looking. I said, science raises its hands and surrenders. This is the problem. We cannot diagnose or treat because I don't even see it. It didn't lighten her up. She says, no, Doc, trust me. At 7 a.m. in the morning, when I got up and I went into the bathroom and the sun was shining through that window in a certain angle, I could see it. I said, I've got the solution. You tell your husband to sleep on the couch. I'm going to sleep with you tonight in bed. We're going to get up together at 7 a.m. in the morning and go to the bathroom and see if I can see that wrinkle. Well, at that point, the mother bust out laughing. She couldn't. She couldn't contain it anymore. And the woman sort of lightened up and laughed. So this is the human fantasy gone amok, right? I said to her, listen, I said, you understand we decay. You understand that our body decays. You've had 2 children. You've blessed your family with 2 children. That was a decay on your body. That's a sacrifice men should recognize. And it's honorable. But it's one thing to see what you can do to ameliorate some of the effects of that decay. It's another thing to pretend it's not happening and to augment by the bad counselor of the mirror the extent of this wrinkle. Because I said, a typical thing I do with my patients, I'll say, okay, tell me the difference between the right and left side of your face of your mother. And I get between them such that she can't look at her mother. Typically, most people don't know what the difference between the right and left side of their very loved one person's face they see every day. I said, well, I can tell she's got this subtle difference in her eyebrow, this eye's like this, the ear's like this, subtle difference. Oh, shit, I never noticed that. I said, well, of course you never noticed that because beauty is harmony. And when there's harmony, our eye doesn't fix on a point. If I had a scar here, if your mother had a scar there, because that's not natural, your eye you would have known she had the scar on that side of her face. So I said, I give him a spiel about skin care. And after she was satisfied with all that, and I try and another thing I often say to patients, especially the parents of my children, is that this problem you see, your child's cleft, whatever, has already been a blessing in your life. How? They're distraught, they're in tears. I said, well, your kid has acted like a pin that blew up the bubble of of your fantasy, an imaginary world of how life and your etc. should be. The should is what your kid popped. How life should be. So already is a blessing. The kid has uncovered weaknesses and missing elements of your life and worldview that can't explain pain and suffering, injustice, etc. So already the kid's a blessing. This kid in your womb, who's still in your womb, because he's popping the bubble of your fantasy and bringing you to ground, to earth. Because true knowledge is experience, is not my fantasy. That's the difference between academic theology and real theology, which is always an experience of God and restored nature. So anyway, after I gave her the spiel, I said, look, let me ask you something. Do you have any girlfriends? She said, oh, sure. I said, do you discuss with them how to be better wives, how to be more humble, how to take care of your husbands better, how to raise your children better, how to control your passions, your consumptive explosions, etc.? She said, oh, no. I said, well, oh, my God, have a seat. I said, now you should be crying because you don't have any friends. You have nothing. Sit down. Anyways, you can imagine the way I practice limits my practice to humane levels of work. I sort of naturally have filtered out a lot of the pure aesthetic stuff. Although I do want to say a lot of men judge women for their desire to look beautiful. And I think that's hypocritical and erroneous. First of all, our decay is a spectrum. Okay, on the one side of the spectrum is a trauma, which is an instant decay. And then as we move along that spectrum, you may have an infection, you can have a cancer, you can have things like your high blood pressures and diabetes, and then you have the whole process of decay, the slow degeneration that we call aging. That's all part of the spectrum of decay. So a woman whose nature is to beautify the world can't be condemned for desiring to beautify the world for you, her husband, or whatever. We can be critical of her vanity and not inducting and not having a whole understanding of beauty and not inducting this decay into the broader hope of the resurrection and true ultimate healing, which it refers us to, their desire to overcome death. In other words, the insistence on the facelift is an acceptance that life basically ends with death. It's not a referral or a reminder to something beyond the decay of this life.
What was that last sentence? Joseph, could you
I said
repeat
her
it?
an insistence on an aesthetic operation in this life, though I've never denied to anybody. Well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, there are a couple of people who occasionally gets totally psycho, you know, woman. But what I want to do with an aesthetic patient is challenge them to understand why they want this done.
Hmm.
Because aesthetic surgery, in a way, is putting lipstick on a pig. Decay is coming. It's going to speed up. In fact, I've never seen a study that shows that my intervention doesn't speed up decay. Just saying. I don't know. Um, I mean, it may set you back and make you look younger for a little while, but the process of decay continues. And we know people who've had multiple aesthetic surgeries. They look monstrous. They look horrible. You can spot them a mile away. But I
Can,
guess
can,
what I was saying is this. What I was saying is that the desire for an aesthetic surgery hides in it a belief that all I have is this life. And that's what I was saying earlier.
can you say more about this? When you were saying, don't look at sin moralistically, but as part of this decay. And the image that came to my mind when you said that is almost like since the fall, we're radioactive and we're decaying, inexorably. And but sin, where I make a personal choice to do something bad, like is that not moralistic there? Or how do we look at that if not moralistically? Where I'm actually
Not,
presented, the choice, do I, insult this child or do I say something kind to it? And I choose the cheap insult or something. I'm a teacher.
I'm not sure I understand the query. Uh, I mean, moralistic doesn't mean that uh, there isn't a right and wrong or good and bad. The question is the reference point. And the question is, I guess, how I address it. I'm not sure if I understand fully.
No, no, I think that's it. I mean, it sounds like that does answer it because if I address it, my capacity to make virtuous choices is itself, it seems to me, like a perishable asset or something. Like the more I sin, the harder that gets to recover, or um, or outside of Christ and his sacramental grace, it just seems really limited my capacity to choose the right thing. Even though
So,
I'm conscious of it as a moral failing,
mm,
and
so
even ashamed of it, that doesn't seem to translate into the power to overcome it. It's
well,
absent the church.
so here's typical examples of saints who just violate norms. First of all, in the bourgeois society with its current monetary system, you have to remember what George Bernard Shaw, I think it was, who said, to not love money is the height of madness, stupidity, and wickedness. Okay. So uh, look at Saint Spiros, my saint. Remember, he had this one of his stories is these two would-be thieves who went in the middle of the night into his where he kept the sheep, and somehow some force bound them, and he found them the next morning. What did he do with them? Did he turn them in? No. He blessed them. He said, "For your vigil, here, take a sheep." Completely contrary to the logic of the world. What did Dionysius do when the murderer of his brother came into the monastery to hide? Dionysius, like he told, I've murdered someone. Dionysius hides him, not knowing it was his brother he murdered. But when the townspeople came to the monastery, they said, Dionysius, we're looking for the murderer of your brother. The guy was in the cellar above listening, was sure that Dionysius was going to turn him in. Dionysius said, I haven't seen any murder. And when they left, he gave the man provisions and sent him off with the blessing. This is completely contrary to our basically cataphatic way of thinking, to our legalistic, juridical way of thinking, to the sense of justice society is put inside our heads.
Can I ask, like, so just return, I think I kind of asked this before, but where do I get principles? Like, if I need to make a choice, how do I do that apophatically without reference
Okay,
to the sort of,
so a typical discussion I've had with people. I have guns. I was at the university at Hopkins, I was on the target practicing with a range, etc. So I've enjoyed target practicing from time to time. So one question that comes up often to me is, you're going to shoot somebody that comes into your home. It's very macho and American, right? Especially from Florida, where we have castle laws, where my home is there, where the police sheriff comes out every year and reminds would-be thieves that, hey, if you break into a Florida home, you can expect to get shot. And it's, well, the Lord, again, doesn't give us prescriptions, and he doesn't take away my right to defend myself. But what I don't want to do is turn it into an ideology and say, hey, if someone breaks into my house, I'm going to pull that gun and shoot him. No, that's the difference. The apophatic leaves room for the freedom of God to work. I don't want to ever have to make that choice. I have the right to. The Lord didn't tell Peter to put his knife, leave it at home. He said, put it in your sheath. But he'd reminded him, those who live by the sword will die by the sword. But he told him to put it in his sheath, not take it off. So do I have a right to defend myself, to pull a gun? Yeah, okay, I do. Do I have a right to take money from my patients? Yeah, I do. But I have the unmercenary saint there on the. It's not about right. It's about love. It's about framing things differently. I remember some priest asked me one day, what do I think about premarital sex? I said, I don't think it exists. He said, what do you mean? I said, the moment you have sex, you have marriage. You're married. I mean, that's what the Greek word means. The Greek word is the same word for marriage and sex. Actually, the Greek word is the same for marriage and F. But anyway, we won't say it in polite company. The Greek language, by the way, doesn't have bad words. It's not a moralistic language. There are bad use of words, like saying a lie is a very bad use of perfectly good words. I remind you that the polite plural was inducted into the Greek language with the creation of the modern Greek state. It was not part of the Greek language. By the way, the Greek language, the language is the gift of the Word of God, capital W, to his image, the preeminent gift. Because it's with the Word that we turn experience embrace it into our logical essence, our logikiousia. Our misuse of the word is in replacing true experience with fantasy. What doesn't come from experience, but is my fantasy's attempt to reinterpret the world on my terms. And that's part of the fruit of the fall. So an apophatic way allows freedom for creation and for God to work in our lives. So I have what I think is the highest calling when I practice, and then I have the liberty to do what I want, but not
Words
all.
as the expression of the experience. How can you tell, or how does one ensure that there's a close compatibility between that? If I tend to think of words as theophany, that they're actually like kind of continuous with the thing to which they have reference.
Mhm.
Um, but if one is trying to express something, even say just like a poetical experience of, the beautiful autumn or your love for your wife or something, there is like the slipperiness of language where you can sort of fall away and have and miscarry the fidelity of the words to the reference, and you kind of create a false icon.
That's true. An idol.
Um, yeah. So how do you? And then there's of course like there are. I read this year and was very moved by Father Nikolai Steinhardt's Journal of Joy. He was a Romanian confessor in can't remember which gulag he was in, but he was also a literary man, wrote a lot of criticism, and so his diary is kind of unique in that it's like constantly quoting from French plays, and it's kind of funny in that regard. But he has sort of a constant obsession with not was sort of having a deep entrenchant fidelity to correct usage of language and never betraying. So he, talking about it's similar to Solzhenitsyn's, Live Not by Lies, is that there are political formulas that are expressed in language, but you also have to make choices. So, the interrogator would present him with an account of something that he said, basically, in a kind of a narrative form. And, they would say, sign this. And he would say, well, it's true, but it's true in a certain sense, like this account that they've written. But because their entire system is based off a lie, in a deeper sense, it's a lie. So he wouldn't sign it. But like, I don't even know how do you make choices like that, and at what level you start making those choices. Because we're presented with even when I go to, the grocery store now, and it's like you can check out with your tap to pay and your palm or, biometrics or something. It's like this whole thing is just not real at such a deep sense that it's like, how do I even make a choice about anything, basically? Especially in
Well,
this apophatic sense.
yeah, well, it is an illusion in a way, but hell is real, and it's all part of that picture of hell. I think if I've understood you, very significant for me to keep me grounded and to not absolutize language itself, but learn to understand it is that's part of the function of praying continuously, the name of Jesus, and all the prayers the church gives us and all the worship the church gives us is to slowly permeate our minds with a proper use of language and the proper understanding of language. Now, you have to understand the limits of each language too. Not all languages are the same. Uh, the English language structures conscious. The English language, where every word capitalizes the I, structures conscious very differently than the Greek language, where everywhere you turn, it points you to a we. For example, in the Greek, both the Greek and the English use the word logical similarly in day-to-day conversation. What is logical is a series of abstractions, one following the other in a conventionally agreed upon way. We say, okay, that's logical. But there's a deeper meaning in the Greek too, and that is what is logical is that which leads to logos, the dialogue, to an us. In the Greek, you don't have to say the I most of the time. You capitalize it only in the beginning of the sentence, and most of the time the end of the verb tells you whether it's I or you or he or whatever. So all these things structure conscious differently, which is what drove Florovsky to say that you don't become Greek, you can't become Orthodox. He didn't mean it racially, obviously. But just like the Lord prepared Israel to create a safe space and time and space for the coming of his mother, Israel's function is fulfilled at that point. The Lord worked in the rest of history and peoples as well for his purposes, and he worked among the Greeks to create a language that became a vehicle of man's struggle with himself, with his fellow man, and with God, that could express his gospel in a way that, at least till then, other languages could not. So it doesn't mean someone who doesn't speak Greek can't become a saint. That's not the point. The point is that there's an order and a revelation that occurs in time and space through various instruments that the Lord has given us to help us focus and to break the tendency of an autonomizing fantasy to create its own world. And that even includes through the gift of logos, the word, language. And that's where the worship and prayers we spend a lot more time thinking about things than just praying. Think about this. In the scriptures, Jesus another key he gives us to understanding the world is that there are two kingdoms maturing in history, his kingdom and the kingdom of Mammon. If I were to phrase it differently, it would be the kingdom of virtuous self-offering to no end versus the kingdom of possessiveness. That is what my friend Romanides used to say, the selfish love versus selfless love. So he says, Jesus tells his listeners that where your heart is, there's your treasure. So he's telling people how do you spend your time, most of your time? And then he says, your eye is the window to your soul. So he's telling people, where is your attention, most of your attention? And then he says, you can't serve two kingdoms. So he's saying, where's your devotion? So how we spend our time, attention, and devotion is the essence of our religion, is the essence of what our priority is. In bourgeois society, it's the accumulation of money, accumulation and consumption. That's how people structure their lives. That's where vast majority of time goes. But even for most Christians who read more than they pray, that means they operate in the world of their imagination and their attempt to figure things out versus in the world of worship and glory, where you have to make that your own. I don't know if there's a subtle point I'm making there about where most of I see it in myself. That's why I'm talking from personal experience. I don't have to look outside myself. Whereas the Lord has given us this phenomenal gift. People come to Greece, they want to see the Acropolis. The Acropolis is a monument to 5 big egos. You know what's democratic and truly the fruit of the people is the Greek language and worship and the texts of our dogmas. These are the fruits of a living people, not some experts, but a living people who, to frame it in terms of, because this is political, come back to where we started, to frame it in terms of modern theory of government. It's how a Christian executes, judges, and legislates. The Christian embraces the world not as it is, but in its restored nature, in its nature. So he's critical of it. And embracing it in its nature, he's the conscience of the world. He reminds the world this is its true nature and purpose. And it's in that sense that he's free politically to execute, judge, and legislate, not to pick up a gun and shoot somebody or pass laws cataphatically about how we're not talking about theocracy here. I'm just using modern political terms of governance to indicate, make a reference for how a Christian exercises power. It's the power of love, the power of clean conscience. It's the power that has the blameless fear of death and decay that Christ himself bore witness to in Gethsemane, but at the same time already lives outside of death.
Maybe, unless you have something to interject, Dr. Tim, we can circle back around to the beginning, which is, the politics is theology, theology is politics, which I think that view has been lost because we've also lost the sense of theanthropy, which is also a loss of the understanding of the incarnation, and the healing of that division between body and soul. Um,
All here,
a historical kind of Christianity too, which is exactly.
and that's not all of this shows, by the way, Christianity isn't pacifist. We're not anti-violence for ethical grounds because of the other and whatever other nonsense I've heard, but we're anti-violence because ontologically God is love. But because God is love, we can exercise violence on our wills, see Gethsemane, human will, on all symbols, human symbols of division, money being the ultimate one. See what Jesus did to the money changers in the temple. So money is today the ultimate symbol of division. Money rests on division. Money rests on power, on fragmentation, because it just comes from an autonomized fantasy, a system of values that I create, that I impose on the world. If I take the system of values into this abstract space called money, and so that I can evaluate, judge, subjugate, possess, consume the world around me, make it my own. It's money that betrayed Jesus, right? Isn't it interesting what happened to that money? I mean, in Roman law, your Caesar and every Caesar and every citizen was a person only to the extent that he had property. No property, you were res, according to Roman law. Thing. You were a thing if you had no property. And look, even in his death, that money, which Judas threw back to the Pharisees, upon his death became res nullus, which means legally it belonged to no one, and became res religious. It was offered to the lower gods, gods under the earth. And it was used by the Pharisees to buy the potter's field or the plot of land to bury the stranger. So even in his death, in a great act of irony, the money used to betray Jesus is used to bury those who had nothing to call their own. They were non-persons. They were thrown in the valley of Gehenna. Now they had a place, gave them a place to rest. And your Roman citizen vacillates between being a persona and being a res. So the whole tie of citizenship to property. That's the roots of a modern bourgeois society that we've inherited from Roman times. The church in its Babylonian captivity, unfortunately, by church, I mean the institutional church, is preoccupied with secondary and insignificant things, predominantly as far as I'm concerned. Not tending, not stewarding the world around us as she should.
All right. Well, I think we can wrap it up there. We're at about an hour and a half, so
All right. We don't want to surpass any limits. We
I,
want to be
I think
anomic.
I think when this comes out, as a YouTube channel, I'll go back and come up with some more questions. Yeah, if we are privileged to do a round two.
up to Dr. Spiro. I'm in. Here, I'll
Okay.
stop
Well,
the
if